DeathsStalker here. So I thought I'd give you my thoughts on who had the best motorcycle for 2020 for the MotoGP season, and what I think is going to be the best bike for next year. Now, the reason I can sort of make projections for next year is because the engines they used in 2020 they have to use again in 2021. Now, of course, chassis, forks, swing arm, all that sort of stuff, that can be changed, and the electronics can be adjusted. But the actual heart of the beast, the motor, I can't touch that. So, without a doubt, probably the best all-round motorcycle has been the Suzuki. Now, no question it's down in horsepower, but handling, like being able to corner, it is by far the best bike. There's no question about it. It outturns pretty much everything. But the really big thing about the Suzuki is that it's really, really good on tire management. All the races pretty well, like the last 10 laps of the race, the Suzuki has always seemed to have a little bit more tire life than everyone else. Now, there have been exceptions, because you have to remember it's electronics. Sometimes other people guess better, but for the most part, once Suzuki sort of got their act together, you have to remember is that Alex Rins managed to separate his shoulder or dislocate his shoulder the first race, and so he has been fighting an ongoing battle with that, and I know he needs surgery to get it properly repaired. And Joan Mir is, I believe, just in his second season of MotoGP, so he's actually now starting to come to grips with the bikes, and it was just getting better and better and better. And I think the fact that they're a little down on horsepower made it better. Now, the second best bike would have to be the Suzuki, the Yamahas, simply because they've won more races. And again, the Yamahas again are down on horsepower. But the one thing about the Yamahas, and riders have said that for many, many years, is that the Yamahas are actually the easiest of the MotoGP bikes to learn how to ride fast. They have less sort of finicky problems like hard turning or brutal acceleration that the other manufacturers have. And the only downside, of course, with the Yamaha is that their engine is not reliable. They had a valve issue this year, which they ended up getting done for cheating, for not following the rules and regulations for engines. They've had several motors fail. They've had riders run out of engines. Maverick Vinales had to pull another engine out from the box and ended up with a pit lane start because he exceeded his engine limits. So Yamaha has a serious issue with engines. And Yamaha also has a problem with, it seems, with setup. The bike, when there's lots of grip, the bike works really well. When the grip is sort of like meh, they seem to have problems. And in like mixed conditions, when it's sort of half wet, half dry, they don't do well at all. Part of it might be they have a lot of younger riders now on the team, and they don't have as much experience from the rider's perspective. And they've also had issues like Valentino was missing in action because of a positive COVID test, and they've had problems with some of the team members and support members getting testing positive or being exposed to it as well. And this sort of stuff just kind of messes up the whole synergy of the team. But the Yamaha has been for years been like the better handling motorcycle. It's just that they've been trying to get that extra horsepower out of the engine, and that actually, I think, has been hurting them. Now the next bike, there's a lot of gravel in this corner, holy cow. that you might think of a bit of a surprise is the KTM. Now, a couple years ago, the KTM, it was, you know, it was other than just the fact that it was a walking billboard for the manufacturer. It was not a competitive motorcycle at all. And then they hired Danny Pedrosa when he retired from HRC, and Danny did a lot of work. The engineers listened to what he had to say because they were getting experience from a top racer, and all of a sudden the KTM became a very good handling motorcycle. And this season they actually won a couple races. Now the bike still has some issues. There's some deficiencies around there as well. I don't think the engine is too much of a problem. Like, they might be down a little bit of horsepower, but compared to like the Yamaha and the Suzuki, they are faster. It's just when they run across the Hondas and the Ducatis is when they seem to have, you know, a horsepower disadvantage. But the bikes actually turn very well. They brake pretty good, and it also helps they've got some very young and aggressive racers who are trying to get the most they can out of that bike. So KTM's actually done an excellent job considering how short they've actually been in the MotoGP circuit. Now the next bike, it was sort of a toss-up, but I'm gonna give it to Ducati, because, you know, Ducati is still, and you see it every time there's any sort of length of a straightaway, they are the fastest motorcycles around. But Ducati this season has had a serious problem not being able to get that motorcycle to turn around a corner. They've actually admitted they have had a problem with the Michelin came up with a new rear tire, and Ducati has not got their head wrapped around it, and they just you know, with the shortened season and lack of testing, they just haven't been able to figure out what's going on. Will it work next season? I don't know, because Andrea Dovizioso is leaving the team. He's taking a sabbatical right now, and he may or may not be back in MotoGP, and I doubt he'll ever be back with Ducati. And they're going to have Jack Miller and Pecco Bagnaia as the factory riders. And although Jack has got, let's don't trust the guy here on, okay, although Jack has got a lot of experience, you know, he's been riding Ducatis for a couple seasons, still not certain he's dialed in how to set the bikes up to their maximum efficiency. But there's absolutely zero question that he can ride that motorcycle. He has demonstrated many times. It's just several cases of bad luck. He hasn't been able to get everything out of it. You know, who would have thought a tear-off could get sucked into an engine and block the airbox, or, you know, being taken out by Brad Binder. Now, of course, the next one, of course, will be Honda, with Marc Marquez out with that broken arm for the entire season. Honda was sort of like left with nothing. Cal Crutchlow was injured from the very first weekend. Alex Marquez, a full-blown rookie with zero real time on a MotoGP bike, and, you know, I give the guy tons of credit. He took, you know, the first half the season to sort of come to grips with the bike and figure things out. His race pace was always very good at the end of the race. He just hasn't quite learned how to qualify yet. And he has qualified a few times pretty well, but unfortunately he's also now reaching the point where, as he's pushing it, he's starting to crash now. And I figure next year, you know, with a little more work, I think he can actually be a podium finisher or even a winner. And the next place, of course, is final is Aprilia. Now, Aprilia got dealt a bad hand with Andrea Ioni getting the 18-month suspension for doping, which is now turned into a 4-year ban. And they've had to get Bradley Smith, who's their test rider, to step up to be one of the racers, because there's no MotoGP racers available right now. And Aleix Espargaro's been riding the wheels off the bike, and the new Aprilia is actually a pretty darn good bike. Unfortunately, Italy, being an Italian company, when Italy had the big lockdown for coronavirus, it was, you know, very damaging to them, because that meant their engineers couldn't work on the bikes. They couldn't do any testing, because they actually, having not finished on a podium at all, they can do as much testing as they want. It's one of the allowances that they get in MotoGP for being a lower placed team. And unfortunately, with the lockdown, they haven't been going anywhere, and the reliability of the engine has been hurting them, because the few times that Aleix is looking like he's going to get a podium, they've had a problem with the engine. Like they've had a few engine failures, and you know, it's disheartening, because the guy's trying so hard with that bike, and it is, by the looks of it, it's not a bad bike. It probably needs another 10 or 12 horsepower to be right there, but they right now can't get it up to what it should be. So that's how I see it. Now the question is, what do I see for next year? Well, the problem is that Suzuki and Yamaha still have the slowest bikes. And the teams that actually probably could make the best effect of having to use the same engines for next season is probably going to be the big three V4s, which is going to be Honda, Ducati, and KTM. All three of those companies have motors with tons of horsepower, and for the most part, very good reliability. They just got to make their bikes handle. Now, with Marc Marquez out, it's hard to tell how effective the upgrades have been done on the 2020 Honda, but when you watch those few races where, you know, Alex Marquez managed to get the bike on the podium in the wet and the dry, and starting to show a little bit of form, and you replace him with his brother Mark uninjured, that doesn't bode well, because you know he can take a bike that's, you know, marginal and win with it, or finish second every race that he doesn't win, which he has done before. So that, I'm probably going to give a slight nod to Honda if Mark comes back and is fully fit and able to ride at his normal level. I can actually see the Honda doing very well next year. Now the next people I would probably say would do very well is probably going to be KTM. They've got their motor pretty good, and they just gotta get a little more experience and a little more adjustments to get their setup on their bike, because their problem seems to be trying to find the setup for their motorcycle for the in the practice and whatnot for qualifying and the race, because there's some tracks where KTM just hasn't done well, and there's other tracks where when they have a good setup you can actually see the bike how it's able to perform. Ducati, it sort of depends. They've had a lot of issues with not listening to their riders for what they need to have on their bikes. So if they do, and the riders are actually able to communicate properly, and Ducati builds a chassis that actually can turn, along with keeping the horsepower, Ducati could be a force as well. As far as Aprilia, I can't see them changing very much. I can see them making some improvements. Now, Suzuki and Yamaha. Now, Suzuki obviously currently has the better package, but the problem with them being down on horsepower, on tight tracks where they need a lot of side grip, it will definitely help them, but there are a few tracks where you do require horsepower, and if they're not able to produce it, I can see them getting eaten up by the Hondas, Ducatis, and KTM's. Yamaha, they have their engine reliability problem. Now they can probably get some exemptions to fix whatever the problem is, maybe. Apparently it's not as easy as I thought it was. But the I don't know, like Valentino Rossi is, you know, he's sort of like nearing the autumn of his career, and for the last couple of years they've not been taking as much advice from him as they have been from the younger, faster riders. But I'm also getting the impression the younger, faster riders don't necessarily know what they want. Maverick and Fabio, like Lynn Jarvis mentioned, that everyone's riding a different sort of setup. Like no two bikes of the four M1s in MotoGP are even remotely similar, other than the fact their engine and the base parts of the chassis, like swing arms, suspension, and electronic setups. So everyone runs different. So you have four riders asking for something different. It's awful hard for the engineers to give them something that everybody wants. So it's going to be hard to see what happens with Yamaha. But if the engineers at Yamaha can come up and make the bikes not wear tires out and work in all conditions, it could be a force. But I don't know, I'd have to see a couple races before. So that's my opinion of who I think's got the best bike for 2020, and who I think's probably going to have the best bike for 2021. Let me know what you think. DeathsStalker.